I would like to invite to our virtual stage Yasir Mirza, the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at the Financial Times. Yasir has broad experience as a diversity leader working in the media and with organizations around the world. Before joining FT, he has spent time at The Guardian, the BBC Studios, the Open Society Foundation, and he has been a speaker at UN conferences on the topics we are addressing today. So in the next 15 minutes, Yasir will cover some of the DEI dilemmas that he has faced and how he plans to approach them to bolster diversity and inclusion at the FT. Welcome to the News Impact Summit, Yasir.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here at the News Impact Conference, and just listening to the earlier session, it was so great to hear how inclusion and diversity is very much now a strategic priority for media organizations. I think if we sort of look back and some of the experience I've had at working at The Guardian, BBC, Channel 4, where we are working with environments or working in cultures where it's quite a strategic priority. So with The Guardian, liberal journalism was at the heart of The Guardian, and diversity and inclusion is very much part of that. Whether it was Channel 4 of trying to change societal perceptions on screen around underrepresented and diverse groups, or the BBC in terms of reflecting diverse societies. Now, I guess the challenge and the question is, in order to make sure your content, whether it's on-screen content or what your output is as a publisher and as a newspaper, do you have to be diverse and inclusive or do you have to have diverse representation in the newsroom in order for the coverage to be reflective? And with that comes an opportunity, but also a challenge as well, because I guess the question is, who represents who? Do you have a diverse newsroom to reflect accurately as possible a kind of a diverse society? And I think the key thing around that is to avoid homogenizing diverse groups. What we want to do is get to a place of showing diversity within diversity. So I'm sat here as a brown Muslim gay guy. I represent myself. I have a different lens and perspective of people from my background and communities, but I can only represent myself, not a community. So I think that it's really nice to see the conversation really moving on. From years back, I probably will kind of go back to The Guardian of what diversity and inclusion meant and how that sort of worked and how that built. I think it was a really interesting place in that very much people were bought into the agenda. They really saw that it was important that we ensure we include diverse voices in our coverage, ensure that we had a diverse newsroom, and making sure that the content was reflective. Now, when I first started, we weren't so bad on sort of being diverse, but actually we could have been a lot better. But for me, I thought the entryway into diversifying and changing societal perceptions and showing more diversity within diversity was to really start to open up the opinion pages. And I thought that was a great opportunity, because if you look at the industry, you look at the challenges, it's entry, it's attraction into the industry, but it's also how do you succeed when it's a really unique environment, when you got a style of working, a style of communicating, a style of almost confidence, really, that really was a little bit alien to underrepresented groups. So it's about breaking those barriers down. And I think as we've gone on, we've seen such great research out there, particularly by the London School of Economics, who have talked about the barriers within the media sector, which is around certainly kind of from the UK perspective, around class and around, you know, your educational background, your family, the wealth that you have, that really will set you up, because it's a really rewarding industry, but it's an industry that's incredibly hard to get into. So if you don't have any support, whether it's financial support or support in terms of your network, it's really hard to kind of succeed into the organization. So I feel like we're starting to get to a better place of really understanding and unpacking diversity, because we're in a place of ensuring the value of diversity, having pluralistic voices. But in order to be diverse, you've got to be inclusive. But then in order to be inclusive, you have to create a culture of a sense of belonging for for diverse employees to feel like they can be at their best. But to be at their best, you have to create that psychological safety so people can bring their full, authentic selves to work. And I'll just give my personal example. It took me a long time to come out as a gay man, because I came from a certain background and culture, which it was pretty hard to be myself. And creating the right culture where there's an understanding of, you know, what it's like being from a background where you're excluded and ostracized, and it takes a lot of bravery to kind of for people to come out. But then we've obviously had a really difficult 2 years. We've had the pandemic, and then we've had obviously George Floyd and what came out of that. And now the conversations of equities come back into it, and all of those complex factors of privilege and othering and imposter syndrome and exclusion, and how that's played out. And I do feel organizations are a little bit struggling with how to deal with expectations of I would say sort of Gen Z and employees of the values that they espouse. So whether it was Guardian, BBC or Channel 4, there was a real now attention to really amplify and become diverse. So most of those organizations had diverse targets, and they had a real strong ethos and remit within their purpose. But actually, often the numbers, the representation in senior positions was still lacking. And the question is why? Why is it taking so long? And for me, I feel like there is the way you tell stories, who you tell stories, how people can empowering people to tell stories in their own way is probably the key thing. And there were some building blocks in The Guardian in terms of opening up the opinion pages, getting diverse writers from underrepresented backgrounds to tell stories only they could tell, but how we could build and support them to really understand what it's like and connecting their stories, to running community journalism, actually a citizen journalism program for places in the world where we just didn't have the reach, but we knew we had really great stories. And the two things we wanted to help and teach people was around evidence and verification. How do we teach people the right type of evidence for real important social issues and stories? But in order for us to verify it, we needed that evidence. So we ran sort of citizen journalism programs in the favelas of Brazil, to the slums of India, to rural townships in South Africa. And I think what that did is not only created a kind of a reach to all of those really important stories that needed to be told, but it was a way of educating our editors and our commissioning editors to the wealth of stories out there, so how they can engage in diversity, which is moving it away from it's just the right thing to do. Of course it's the right thing to do, but there is absolutely a richness and a wealth of stories out there. And I think once we get to that place of curating stories, curating voices, but finding ways in which we can reach different types of communities is really, really key, and opening ourselves up in the way we tell stories. Because I think certainly in the UK, the way certain media outlets look to tell stories, there's a certain craft, there's a certain way you tell stories, and that is very much led by a particular type of culture. And I think we're in a really interesting situation now with social media has completely sort of changed the way we have authoritative voices. Who do we listen to? There's so many choices of content out there, and actually often it's about people who get into really good spaces or who can shout the loudest get heard. So facts and research and evidence now is almost taking a little bit of a backseat to basically a strong narrative, or people who can connect onto social media platforms and get their reach out there. So it's a really interesting time for diversity and inclusion. I do think there's some really great opportunities now, because it's very much strategic priorities, very much around authentic leadership and finding ways in which you can sustainably diversify the newsroom, because it really is connecting to an ever-changing and evolving diverse world. So I would say that probably the learnings that I've certainly seen from Channel 4, The Guardian and the BBC is making sure we engage in diversity in the right way. I think targets are an indicator for success, but they shouldn't be the only thing that we should be working on, because what you need to do is hire sustainably, change the way in which we view storytelling. And by doing that, we're kind of becoming inclusive, and we allow for new storytellers that come in who are diverse and who have great talent, and also not pigeonholing diverse and underrepresented talent to just talk about social issues, just to talk about issues of race or gender or sexuality or disability. It's about getting them to talk about the kind of the nuances and the complexities around so many different issues. And actually, any good media organization and journalist will be to be a good journalist and a good media organization on diversity. It's very much inherent in the fabric. So a good journalist has a black book that has contacts from all different sections of society, is curious, has the ease and understanding to work with underrepresented groups. So we talk about all of the complexities of privilege, and if you've been othered, if people have imposter syndrome, if people just don't really understand and connect to the way the world of media works. I think it's about having a kindness to that, and to be a bit more open to the way how people consume content and how they can relate to brands. So I think it's a really great opportunity. I mean, at the FT, I would say, and just recently joined 3 months ago, I feel like it's a great sort of brand in that it's the critical friend to the world of business, and should be a home for all diverse talent. We have most of our core readership is actually white men. Now the question is, why is our readership not more diverse? Do we need more female writers, more writers of color to reach out to those minority or diverse readerships? And I would say yes, but I also think there's a bit of breaking down the perceptions and the brand that the content should be appealing to everyone. So we just kind of get the balance right of not going into those kind of homogenizing diverse groups that they'll only be interested in certain content if it's produced by a certain individual. I think that content can be so far reaching for everyone. So yeah, that's a kind of an overall summary of I guess my experience of diversity in the media.
Thank you, Yasir, for sharing your experience and your knowledge. Several ideas will stay with us, and things that can be done at legacy media, but also other newsrooms to hire more sustainably, review the process of storytelling and how the content is produced. So we'll be talking with you again during the Q&A after the second lightning talk. So please stay with us to follow the next chat. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Lara Joannides. Lara is the BBC's creative diversity lead for 50/50. She oversees a number of initiatives to ensure the BBC content represents a fair society as a whole. This is not Lara's first News Impact Summit, as she has been a panelist in Munich at our first summit addressing diversity and inclusion precisely. And today, Lara is sharing with us some of the lessons learned since the BBC 50/50 initiative expanded its scope beyond improving the representation of women to becoming inclusive of disabled people and those from ethnic minorities. Welcome, Lara. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back and sharing the progress that we've been making. So 50/50 The Equality Project is an on-air initiative. And just as everyone's been discussing this morning already, and as Yasir was saying, it's really important to have diverse representation behind the scenes in the workforce so that you can have really authentic and inclusive portrayal and representation as well. So this is one of the tactics that we're using at the BBC to ensure that we have diverse and inclusive content by setting kind of targets and having our teams kind of work over time to really make sure that they are achieving those targets. But that's just kind of one scope. So for those who aren't familiar with 50/50, I'll share a quick video now, if that's okay, just so that you can see our progress and go through a few slides to show you how we are using 50/50 to make a difference.
featured 50% women in their content, up from 31% when they first joined the project.
This is only the beginning. At the BBC, 200 teams are now also working hard to increase their representation of disabled contributors.
And those from ethnic minority backgrounds. And some are already seeing an improvement.
All this in a year when the coronavirus pandemic has impacted lives and industries globally. Through 50/50, we're ensuring that more voices are being heard.
Whatever challenges lay ahead, the BBC and the 50/50 Global Partner Network are striving to create content that better reflects our world.
So 50/50 started as a gender project, and we were just called 50/50, and now we're called 50/50 the Equality Project, because we've really learned a lot from monitoring gender, and we want to apply that to monitoring ethnicity and disability as well. So what you can see here is a graph showing the same results from the video there from our March challenge, but how we improve over time. So for teams who've been in 50/50 for at least 1 year, what's really interesting is we're kind of sticking at 70% gender balance, but as time goes by, more and more teams are getting closer to that target. So for teams who've been doing 50/50 for at least 1 year, you can see 9% are featuring fewer than 40% women. And then that goes down to 5% for people who have been doing it for at least 2 years. And then what was really exciting to us is programs who've been taking part in 50/50 for at least 3 years, absolutely all of them had at least 40% women in their programming. So of course we want to get more to the 50% mark, but it shows that even those who for various reasons may not reach 50, maybe they're at 47, 48, 49%, they're still kind of getting closer to that mark. So what we've seen is, change doesn't happen overnight. It really is creating a cultural change that is having a really slow and hopefully sustainable impact. So we announced in October that we would be applying this to disability and ethnicity representation as well. Our targets at the BBC are 50% women's representation, 20% ethnic minority representation, and 12% disabled representation. And those targets are adaptable according to the programme's population demographic. So the ones that we've got 50, 20, 12 here are kind of general UK domestic, but where we have regional teams, for example, or international teams, they are adjusting those according to the actual population that they are serving and targeting. So, for example, BBC London are aiming for 50% ethnic minority representation. And of course, these targets are adjustable as well as we get more information. And we've just had a census in the UK. So we're waiting to see what that gives us. And then we'll be adjusting our targets in line with that. So it's very much kind of movable and adaptable to make sure that we are representing the audience as accurately as possible. And we aren't yet at a stage where we're publishing that data in the way that we have just shown you with the gender figures, but we will be doing that in our next April report. But this year we asked teams who'd been taking part in a pilot for this monitoring how they've been doing over the last 6 months. And we saw that at least half of those had already shown an improvement in just a few months. So while they may not have all been reaching their targets, they were seeing an increase in the representation of ethnic minority and disabled contributors. And that's in a really short space of time. And also during the COVID pandemic, when teams were in the UK, at least, we had very long lockdown over Christmas that seemed to go on forever. Lots of people off sick, lots of people struggling with caring duties as well. So it was really fantastic for us to see how dedicated the teams were and how much they really cared about it. Some of the challenges we faced in kind of introducing this and implementing it is really very just logistical, trying to implement it in the workflow, giving teams the confidence to kind of figure out how to collect data. Not all journalists are very good with data. We have like fantastic data journalists, but many, work with words. They don't like the look of spreadsheets. It makes them nervous, and also dealing with really busy deadlines, lots of content to get out in a short space of time, particularly in newsrooms. So, some of those challenges in trying to bring people on board and help them understand the importance of this. So we try and keep it really simple at 50/50. We set spreadsheets up for all of the teams. They don't have to do any of that themselves. They literally get given the spreadsheet and enter the figures in themselves. We also make sure that the spreadsheet is exactly how the team needs it. So while, for example, we are looking for that overall figure of whether they're hitting 50, 20, 12%. In the spreadsheets, we do have individual columns that break down the groups further. You know, as Yasir was saying, it's not just about kind of homogenizing groups. Our teams will also want to see within their ethnic minority representation, you know, how are they representing Southeast Asian versus East Asian versus Black and African Caribbean. You know, they don't just want to kind of hit the, what we call in the UK, BAME target. It's important for them to really use that data in a really meaningful way. So we try and make it as easy as possible for them in that way. 50/50 is a perception-based project mostly because, as many of you will know as journalists, it's going to be very difficult for you to always be in contact with every single contributor that you feature in your pieces. Perhaps you're using a clip from agency material or something from library, or, you know, it's just a quick vox pop and you haven't had the time to really ask someone their sensitive and personal information. So what we say to teams is, you know, if they are doing it by perception, to use any publicly available information about the contributor and whether they have a disability or what background they may be from. So that could be something that's mentioned on an organization's biography page of them, if they're an expert or a spokesperson, or, you know, something that they've put on social media, anything that they've publicly disclosed. And so that's how we've been doing it that way. But we do have a small number of teams who do have direct access to every contributor, whether it's, you know, an interview program like Hard Talk, or a longer form documentary program. And they have the opportunity to collect actual data by providing their contributors with diversity forms to complete. And we worked really closely with the BBC's data protection and legal teams to ensure that we are doing that in a data protection compliant way, which is another thing that lots of people will kind of find quite overwhelming. And, you know, everyone's very afraid of getting this wrong. In the UK, we've had a recent overhaul of GDPR. And so, you know, it tends to put people off a bit, but we try to make sure that we've done all that work so that we can explain it to them in the most simple way, and they're not afraid that they're going to do the wrong thing and potentially disclose someone's personal information. But that is, I think, some of the biggest challenges that we've seen in trying to do this work, where it comes to protected characteristics such as ethnicity and disability, is just the paperwork and the admin around it to make sure that we are protecting our contributors' information. We are also working on developing some tech to make it easier for teams. So what you're seeing here are some screen grabs of a dashboard that we've been using at the BBC for a few years now for teams to report their gender figures. And it's worked really well to help drive the progress, because it gives everyone a deadline to work towards in a simple place for all teams to report their monthly gender figures. And it's also open to everyone in the BBC. So the other grab is a kind of comparison page where teams can go, they can see everyone's progress since they've joined the project and compare with other programs and departments as well. And we found that that transparency is really important, because it's not about shaming anyone if they're not reaching their targets. It's about celebrating their successes and also working together to improve where we can and see maybe where they might be struggling. And also the healthy competition there, where they can compare against each other, really helps as well, especially as we get to the end of the month. We're really excited actually at the moment. We are working on a new tracker to enable us to collect ethnicity and disability data in the same way, because this dashboard currently only works for gender. And Stanford University's Computational Policy Lab has been working on a new tracker for us that will enable all the teams to enter their data into the tracker. So we'll be able to get rid of those spreadsheets, which I think will make lots of the journalists very happy. And they'll submit their data there and then submit their monthly figures as well, all in one place. So again, we're making sure it's data protection compliant. We're also making sure it's really simple for busy teams to use, so that they don't have lots of different links and places to go. They can all put it in one area, and it will really help show them in a visual way their progress, so that they can track it and share it with each other. And that's one of the most important things with 50/50, is kind of sharing the information and speaking with each other about who's struggling, how did they overcome certain challenges that might be able to help other teams. And so we're finding that now with ethnicity and disability as well, because we've only just been doing it for about a year now, but some teams are taking a bit slower to join because of all the challenges we've been facing around COVID. That hopefully the kind of original starters of that will be able to share their learnings. And one of the key things I think for us is, we collect data to drive change. So it's not just about the data. It's definitely not just about the numbers. The whole purpose of collecting the data is to make sure that we have quality representation and we're changing the way our teams think. So there are a few other things that we have been doing to help our teams. One is we have a database of new voices, so we call it the New Voices database, and it's potential contributors from all different backgrounds who maybe don't often get the chance to speak in the media, and we don't have in our black books, as Yasir was saying, so we don't have the kind of normal faces and names that we're always reaching to when we're under tight deadline and we need to turn around a quick interview. So this database features more than 2,000 contributors, mostly women, because it started as an expert women's database and now we've expanded it, and the contributors have the opportunity to state what their ethnicity or race is and whether they have a disability, and that will help our teams to know how contributors identify and to find more diverse people to be speaking to and featuring, and that's something that we're really trying to kind of grow and develop and get more contributors to add themselves to that. We also have a few other projects that we work on within the creative diversity team that I'm part of. So we have a Reframing Disability program, which we are doing with Media Trust, a charity in the UK, and that is offering training to disabled experts in a range of subjects to give them the confidence to do media interviews. But equally, as part of it, we've been offering content makers in the BBC training so that they can make sure they are making reasonable adjustments for disabled contributors, and they know how to provide access requirements and make the contributors feel safe and understood and protected, and also how to make sure that we are telling these stories in the right way, whether it's just the language we use or the types of stories we're commissioning, and making sure that the content is accessible as well. And then we also have a program at the BBC called BBC Elevate, which is about progressing disabled talent. So that's a behind the scenes workforce project, and to make sure that, you know, we have staff who are being given opportunities that they may otherwise have been overlooked for because it may have been too difficult, or someone else has been kind of shot over them. So that's kind of important step in terms of how, you know, behind the scenes representation really feeds into on-screen representation. And then finally, you may have heard about our new partnership with Netflix in the commissioning budgets for content that will be made by disabled creatives, and they're going to be looking for and offering funding for projects specifically made by a variety of disabled creatives, whether it's production, writing, filming, and so, you know, those all kind of feed into the same thing, you know, who's telling the stories behind the scenes, but also who we're featuring in those stories, and the stories that we're telling are really important. And one final thing that we have also been doing to really ensure that it's not just about the numbers, but it's also, so it's not just the quantity, but it's also the quality of the representation, is some audience research we've done with Ipsos Mori on inclusive language. And that is to really kind of help to understand how audiences and communities in the UK feel about media coverage and portrayal, and also to use that to turn it into guidance for teams so that they feel more confident when telling certain stories. They feel they understand the issues around representation more. And we've produced a really interesting report called BAME, We're Not the Same. So in the UK, we have quite a controversial term now that used to be used more commonly for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, BAME. And it's exactly to what Yasir was saying. The point is, we can't just homogenize everyone and put them in the same group just because they are not white. Everyone's different and has their own stories and their own experiences. So this research really looks at how people feel about the language used in media and content, and also things that content makers need to be doing to ensure kind of accurate and authentic portrayal, and to make sure that we're really getting those nuances and that intersectionality, and to avoid stereotypes and change the way we are presenting our stories and telling them. So those are some of the things that we've been trying to do. But, you know, there's so many different tranches and aspects of diverse work that all need to work together. And so one of them is kind of targets and data, but the other one is a much more deeper understanding and changing the way people think in the media about the stories they're telling and who they're reaching out to.
So thank you, Lara and Yasir, for these amazing and inspiring talks. We have a lot of questions and comments in the chat, and I've been gathering some of them. So I think we can start. Let's go over this question from Larissa. And she's asking about sources and content. Do the journalists themselves make enough effort to find experts with diverse backgrounds and identities before relying on the circle of the usual suspects for their products? And maybe how in your media, how you promote this diversity in sources and in consequence in content?
I'll just jump in on that one quickly, if that's all right, Yasir. I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to do with 50/50. You know, there will be journalists, I'm sure, who always do go the extra mile and make that effort to reach out to find different experts. But we're trying to encourage everyone to do that so that they kind of think twice before just going, okay, that's the story. I know that person. I saw them on, well, you might have someone, for example, who works on a TV program who said, oh yeah, I heard someone on the Today program on Radio 4. I'll just call them and get them on. And actually, we don't want to do that. So it's partly about changing the way teams think so that every day they have a reminder to try a bit harder and dig a bit further in terms of who they're speaking to, but also having kind of the permission and encouragement from the top, from their management, to maybe take that extra time, spend an extra 15 minutes putting calls in and reaching out and trying to kind of make sure that we're being representative, because I think it also comes down to pressures of deadlines and feeling like you just need to get something out as fast as possible. And I think if you have an editor, you know, I've seen various examples where someone will kind of have a piece that they've done and the editor will read it and say, no, this isn't good enough. Everyone in that piece is white. You know, go and find someone else. So if that starts to become the norm, then the journalists will start doing that before they take that first draft or that first version of the piece to the editor, because they know that it's going to get sent back.
Thank you, Larissa. Thank you, Lara. What about you, Yasir?
Just completely echo what Lara is saying. It's really good to see Lara again from my time at the BBC. It's that bit of the Black Book and having reach and having sort of, so it's firstly about creating that trust and the reach and the leverage with underrepresented and diverse groups. And how do you have the deep understanding and connection to avoid this show me your leader and go to that one person and suddenly they feel like they have that, they represent all of those voices. So I think part of it is extending the Black Book. The other part is to really get a deep knowledge and understanding within ourselves, because I think sort of journalists sometimes need a bit of help with really understanding. So if you're at ease with the subject, if you're at ease with diverse groups, and then you start to see people as individuals, and then you have access. So partly is building trust, partly is a bit of sort of awareness and education ourselves, and the other one is where to go to, because what you also don't want to do is just go to that individual to talk about social issues. You know, if you've got a story on economics, you want to make sure the participants on economics come from a wide range of backgrounds, and they're talking about economics as opposed to their identity. Now, their identity will shape the content. It will shape their opinion on like this economic story, for example. So I think that's the nice nuanced way to kind of to reach out. So it's about going to the ingredients of what a journalist is to be curious, and to be curious is to kind of be curious to all sections of society.
Thank you, Lara and Yasir, for these answers. Now we have a new question. To what extent does contemporary journalism reflect the heterogeneity of the world? In Italy, there are almost no foreign journalists in the newsrooms.
That's a really good question. It's an interesting one. It reminds me of the time we did this Council of Europe project of reporting on diversity within Europe, and they brought over journalists from all parts of Europe together and talking about, so what this question speaks to is around culture and nationality and reporting on the kind of the issues of a country. So obviously if your newsroom is has no foreign journalists, and the topics are very much about national stories, and those communities are not as diverse as others, I think that's probably the tricky one. And I certainly remember the Council of Europe project we were talking at on diversity and inclusion. It just meant so many different things to different European journalists, because in the UK we have a lot more of a deepness around diverse Britain, whereas in other parts of Europe it's just a new concept. It was about how migrants were reported on as opposed to the culture. So I think, look, I think first and foremost, what this question speaks to me is about a deep understanding of what does diversity and inclusion mean for your actual country, your context, your reporting. And I think getting an understanding of that then avoids misunderstanding of what this means.
Lara, do you would like to complement
Yeah, and just to add on that point, I think particularly speaking about the UK, as Yasir said, we do have there's a lot of work done and a lot of kind of understanding and programming around diverse Britain, but it's really important to kind of avoid the stereotyping of talking just about migrant communities or talking just about the Muslim community in respect of terrorism or in respect of kind of specifically related to religion. There are people now, particularly, in the world that we live in today, people have moved around the globe for decades and decades now. And there our first, second, third generation people who, yes, have different backgrounds. I mean, I myself, I was born in South Africa, but my father's Greek and my mother's Italian. And now I grew up in the UK. I'm a citizen of the world. I don't really know where I'm come from. But I think there are so many people like that in countries all over. And it's important that their stories are also respected and told, that they are just someone who grew up in this country. But yes, maybe their parents or their grandparents are from someone else, but that doesn't define who they are. And they shouldn't just be labeled as that group. And so we need to make sure that we're doing that and not just seeing it really separated as, right, so the white Italians and the white Europeans versus the migrants or, the immigrants and all of that.
Thank you, both of you. And I think we have time for one last question. And we have two participants that were curious about the financial side of this kind of initiative. So maybe the question will be how media can start these initiatives like 50-50 or the initiatives of the Financial Times. And on the other side, what are the effects in the financial terms of these initiatives?
So I'll go there first. Just in terms of 50-50, it kind of started out of nowhere, and it was just a pet project or passion project of one of our presenters on World TV who decided to do it themselves. So they set up their own spreadsheet, they started monitoring, and then other programs heard about it, and it just grew organically from there because they were kind of sick of hearing about let's try do something. And I think when you're going to have an initiative that needs funding, it has to go all the way to the top, and it gets held up by red tape and conversations and turns inside out. So they just decided to do it. And then because it took on a life of its own, it got to a stage where actually the then Director General, Tony Hall, was like, wow, this is actually happening. So now I'm going to put some money behind it. And we have funding, very, very small amount of funding for a permanent team to do this. And we have a lot of external partner organizations who've signed up as well. So the Financial Times, for example, is a proud 50-50 member, and other media and non-media organizations. And it really changes depending on the size of the organization and what they can do. So we have a lot of volunteer teams or people who've been kind of asked to do this and take on 50-50 as part of their job. So there is no funding going to it, but everyone's just rolling up their sleeves and mucking in. And then we do have other organizations like ABC Australia who have also hired people specifically as 50-50 roles, and they are putting money into it. So it really, it isn't something that you have to have money behind. If you have the will and you have the motivation and the support, you can do it. It does mean, of course, that there are going to be extra hours worked. But I think don't let the idea of funding put you off. Get started, and then hopefully with it, when you prove it and when you prove the example and show how successful it can be, then the bosses will come on board and maybe support you with funding.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great answer, and I completely agree. It's about the great thing about sort of organizations now is we have a D&I function within there, but the function and as Lara says, it's about getting an idea, getting a project, taking it to the top, getting the support, galvanizing the organization. And when you can connect people, the people power at the beginning stages, it's actually not the finances are what you look for at the end. It's about looking at the idea, look at the value that it brings the organization in terms of its reputation, in terms of sourcing new stories, in terms of finding new talent, and then you look to get sort of funding for it. But then for me, I think actually the biggest resources are the people within the organization, the different experts. So I think that's the job of connecting and bringing people together and showing the value of whatever initiative you want to do. And the key thing I think about any initiative, it's sustainable. And look at 50-50, how it started off, and look, it's growing and growing and growing, and others are following by example. So it's great to see.
Thank you both for your answers, and I think it's time to go back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Yasir and Lara, for being here today with us and for sharing your knowledge on how legacy newsrooms can tackle diversity and inclusion.